I guess let's start with a little bit about yourself. How did you get into branding and subsequently, I guess, rebranding?
Sure. I'm Jim Heininger. I lead the group called Rebranding Experts in the United States. And I come from a 20-year career in the global PR agency environment, having worked for several of the large PR firms, and then served as a strategic communications consultant at McDonald's Corporation, which is based here in Chicago too. And it was McDonald's who supported us in opening our own agency and served them for several years. And then we got into the rebranding side of work and opened Rebranding Experts about 4 years ago now.
Okay, cool. And was that related to, like, did you help McDonald's rebrand in some way, or?
No, it was more once I opened my own firm. We had several different organizations come to us for rebranding support and found that work very interesting, challenging, and really enjoyed it, but realized that it required a lot of capabilities that a traditional marketing or branding firm doesn't have in order for the rebranding to be successful. So things like leadership communications and engagement and culture development, bringing in the HR function, change management, employee engagement, and so forth. So we decided to open a new firm that focused specifically on rebranding and bring together all those capabilities into one team so that we could really help an organization from the very beginning of the rebranding to the end, and really building a new organization that would help them move forward and face the future in a very positive way with this new brand.
Mm-hmm. And how did you pick your own name? It's kind of self-explanatory, Rebranding Experts, I guess.
It is, and very intentionally is that not only for SEO properties, for us to be able to show up easily when somebody was looking for an expert or a specialist in rebranding, that we would show up in the Google searches. So one of the interesting things about rebranding is that normally an organization doesn't go out and communicate to the world that they're going to rebrand. It's a behind the scenes kind of stealth operation until they have the new brand selected and launch it. So that we realized that we had to be in a position that people would find us as being an available expert and engage us without anybody knowing it, to be able to help to support them in this effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when is there a moment, or are there some factors? How should an entrepreneur or CEO or whatever the management in the company is know that it's time to rebrand? Do you experience? Because you said, that it's usually an internal process, but like, how do people know they need that service at all?
Right. Interesting question. There usually is a trigger that would move an organization to decide this is what we need to do. They might not know exactly that rebranding is the solution, but they realize that either their current brand is no longer relevant, it's not serving its purpose anymore, it's not differentiating them in their industry, and that they really need to reinvent themselves and bring themselves back out in a new, fresh, relevant way. Or there is a change in the organization. So it's a new owner, or they've merged, or in many cases, there's private equity investment that comes into the organization that says, we're planning on, want to set you up for success, but we want to purchase some other, organizations in the same industry in the future. And we need a brand that we can put all these different organizations under. So let's rebrand this initial company and give it the kind of a bigger umbrella positioning that'll work for the future.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned
where they faced a crisis.
Yeah.
Those are always a little more, when an organization faces a crisis and feels like it needs to reposition itself for the future and somewhat leave that baggage behind, that's a little bit more of a tricky kind of a rebranding, because you have to own up to what's happened in the past and you can't walk away from it and try to hide it. but there is certainly understandably a need to put a new face forward and make it relevant and interesting for the future.
Yeah, that was a question I had down the list, but now that we touched on it, like we've seen recently, especially obviously with information being so easily accessible and shareable, it's very hard for any brand, I guess, to put on a face and then do something else in the background. And
Right.
also, I guess times have changed as well. So as customers, we're a lot more demanding. So we've seen a lot of rebrands based on that, and some of them with brands that like we've known for generations. So what would you say, or how can a brand still keep that history and legacy, because there is obviously value in that, but still rebrand to adapt? Like how does that work? Do you help people with that sort of a problem?
Yeah, clearly heritage of a company and what it's done in the past and what it stood for and so forth is an important consideration that goes into developing that new brand. And in some organizations has more weight than it does others. We always like to say that people invest in the future. And so let's lean into the future a little bit more in terms of defining a brand that is relevant and that will help you face forward, as opposed to one that brings you backwards or holds you back. And so sometimes figuring out how that heritage supports a new brand and what role it plays is the kind of challenging question that you need to solve. But we always believe that a brand, kind of the golden rule of branding is that it needs to be aspirational. It needs to be something that supports you today forward. And so determining what role heritage plays is unique to each organization.
Yeah. Okay. Don't get that?
Nope, not at all.
Okay.
Sorry.
What are some of the, no, it's okay. Yeah. What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when it comes to rebranding? I guess branding as well, because if they get to rebrand, there must have been some mistakes made already.
Yeah, good question there. So we find that, and we actually did some research about 5 years ago to understand what were the biggest obstacles that organizations faced when they rebranded. And clearly the number one factor was internal engagement and alignment behind the new brand. And that's everything from leadership engagement and buy-in to the process and the fact that we're going to be selecting a new brand, to mid-level management and making sure that they're bought into it and that they are advocates for the process, and then employees themselves who have to deliver a new customer experience based upon this new brand, that they know what it is, they know how to do it, they share a lot of excitement for it as well. So that's one of the key reasons that we designed Rebranding Experts the way we did, which is to bring in all those kind of engagement capabilities that are necessary to get an organization stood up and ready to use the new brand once it's launched.
And that's something that I find in branding is lacking. Like oftentimes all the effort about the brand is like, we need to have a brand, we need to have a story, we need to have a visual identity. Everything is directed towards the consumer. So it's all external. And very often there isn't even a thought, even sometimes in bigger organizations about like, how does that all work and feel internally to do those people? So I guess when you do the rebranding, do you find that like there is that structure already internally in most cases, or do you have to? Okay.
Yeah. We so in most rebrandings, a disproportionate amount of effort is focused externally. And what's the customer going to say? What's the industry going to say about our new brand name? And are they going to accept it? Are they going to like it? None of that even matters or can happen until everyone within the organization itself that's rebranding is behind it. So we have found that most organizations under anticipate the role that will play, and build in several checkpoints along the way, first of all, with leadership, to make sure that they can communicate, why we're rebranding, why is it necessary? Why have we chosen the new brand that has been proposed, and why it works well, and that they believe it and they can convey and excite others about it before you can even go to employees, before you even start to tell employees. So it's several layers of kind of training from the top down before you even launch it to the employees, so that when they hear the leaders talking about the organization, maybe somebody that owned the company and sold it to, to an investor or merged it with another company, and they're sharing excitement about what that new brand is for the company. If they don't believe that those leaders are 100% supportive of it, they're not going to be either. So it's really spending the time to make sure that those layers on down the organization get it, believe it, and can really enthusiastically convey it to others.
Rebranding is usually, like, it sounds like a scary thing to do. Like, everybody thinks about risks and costs, and you kind of making it sound positive.
Good.
It's all like, no, it does sound like, literally, we just spoke about something that most brand owners, business owners don't even realize they have as a problem, that the fact that internally they're not aware of how well known, received, lived is their brand. And that is something that obviously you do with the rebrand. And in a way, it actually does sound like as reviving almost the business, because especially if we take as a starting point the issues that lead to rebrand. So like, we've outgrown the industry, you mentioned brand is not serving the purpose, etc. So it is, it does sound very positive and, I guess, exciting. How long does it usually take? I know it must be like hard to say, it really depends, but on average.
So interesting. The study that we conducted about 5 years ago, and it asked organizations that had rebranded, so they had already gone through the process, what was the average length of time that it took, and it was 12 to 18 months, and that's a long time. So from not only the decision to that we're going to rebrand, but then if it's engaging an outside agency supporter, going through the process of coming up with the new brand. Trademarking is a long issue in the United States. It sometimes takes 4 to 6 months to get a new approval of a trademark, and most organizations don't want to launch it until they've gotten that approval from the government. So and then to get everybody internally, engaged and excited, and all your brand assets updated, and your new website design and so forth, was about 12 to 18 months. That's a long time for any kind of corporate initiative. And keeping the excitement and the enthusiasm behind it the whole way, and not have people going back to asking that question, now, why are we doing this all over again? They need to know why we're doing it, why it's important that it be done, and look enthusiastically to that launch date when they can start to operate under a new brand name. So, and that itself is one of the big risks of rebranding, is keeping that momentum going throughout the whole process, because it's easy for people to get distracted, to have other initiatives that are important to get done in the organization. And things change a lot in 12 to 18 months in any company. And so all of a sudden, is what we started a year ago still relevant today, is kind of a test that you need to go through.
Sure. And do you follow through, like, all of that time you work with the organizations?
Right. We don't let them go until that they've successfully rebranded and have launched and have communicated out to all their different stakeholders. We'll go through a process of putting in place for them, how are they going to measure the success of this, because it will be a long-term kind of measurement capability. And then what are the things they need to do to continue to live into this brand? If it's things that need to be done culturally, or in terms of people's roles and responsibilities within the organization that take time to kind of implement, we'll give them a little bit of a roadmap as to, okay, we're ready to turn you loose with your new brand now. Here are the things that you need to continue to do to make this a success. And then they take on that responsibility from there.
That's cool. That sounds great. Has the pandemic affected your business in any way, and how?
The pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic has slowed down, obviously, a lot of rebranding projects that we had, like, already in the works a year and a half ago, in 2019 and 2020. Other obviously priorities within the organization took the most important role, so that they slowed down on the rebranding because they had to deal with people working from home and changing production capabilities and so forth. Then there came a point where people were like, okay, we need to get back to this and get this done and over with. That, if anything, how we emerge out of this pandemic from a competitive situation in their industry, they needed new news. They needed excitement. They needed something that further, better differentiated them against their competition. So all of a sudden, halfway through the pandemic, the energy came back to, let's get this finished up, because we need to emerge strong as soon as the world goes back to normal. So that was one of the interesting things. We saw a lot of like industries that were hit especially hard, like travel and hospitality. Many organizations just shrunk in their size and suddenly had to look at either mergers or acquisitions, and that kind of changed the whole need for rebranding in some of those different industries. So that's still kind of in the early stages, and we're probably going to see more of that, as there are those businesses that just didn't make it through the pandemic strong enough, and now need to look at what their business options are, and that could possibly include a rebranding as part of a different organization.
Okay. And how do you, let's say that, what type of businesses do you work with? So what type of business, like, let's say, do I have to be, is there a specific size, location? What type of a business can come to you and you'd be happy to work with them?
So we tend to get called most by organizations, that are smaller or mid-size, who have an internal marketing or communications capability, but it's not a large, robust team, and doesn't have the resources to determine how to approach this process, how to lead through a rebranding expert. So they really need an outside expert like us to kind of come in and help. A large corporation with a big, robust team and budget usually has the capacity to do the planning and to move this along, and to be able to rebrand with a different kind of support role. Those small to mid-sized businesses, mid-cap, we kind of call them here in the US, are the ones that tend to call us more frequently, just because they need an extra level of support and team members who can focus on this effort as they're continuing to do business as usual. That's the interesting thing about a rebranding, is business goes on as usual, and this is like an extra level or layer of work that people have to do on top of their day jobs. And that's a little bit what makes it stressful too, is that they are trying to keep up with the timeline, they're trying to keep it moving and keeping progress going, and at the same time do their regular jobs and meet the business demands as well. So that's where we play a really good role in terms of coming in as an extra team to help them move through this process. We've done it many times. We know how to do it. We know what to anticipate every step along the way, so can guide them to say, okay, here's what's going to happen next. This is going to be a little bit of a frustrating process because of these different dynamics. So have a lot of patience, and let's go through it step at a time. We'll come through on the other side. It's going to be okay, but realize that it's a real emotional roller coaster for most organizations to go through this. And how do you keep that interest and that enthusiasm going over what could be 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, that's a lot of work. And as well, as you mentioned, you have to keep going with things like business and life continues. but you would also have, I would imagine, to prepare everything for once that's done. So that's always on everybody's mind. Yeah, so that's not an easy process. Do you have a favorite rebrand story?
Well, there's one that we just did, which I particularly love, and then there's another one that's happened here in the Chicago area where we are that I have always admired. And let me do that one first. It was an organization called the Rehabilitative Institute, and it was primarily a medical facility that worked with individuals that either had suffered severe injury and or perhaps like a stroke or debilitating kind of setback, and they did the rehabilitation process in terms of the medical side, the physical abilities and mental abilities and so forth to help get people back to a full and rich life. And they rebranded to a new name called the Ability Lab. And it was a very forward-looking, positive kind of name and branding, and it always always reflects a change in the way you do business as well too. And so they brought together all the different partners in this process on helping an individual rehabilitate and regain their ability, and worked as one team. So they had a new differentiating kind of way that they were going to present themselves, and this made it so much more positive than the Rehabilitative Institute.
As you say it's well, that's why I love naming and names. It's just that one thing, and you imagine a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And also I would imagine the whole team behind it, like coming to work every day. It's like, I work there, that's what I do. It literally changes your attitude.
And that's good rebranding. Yep, that's what it can do. And really, spark a fire and new enthusiasm within a company, because the way they're going to tell their story now is so much more relevant. It's so much more positive, and they see people responding to it when they tell them the new name, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is going to work great going forward. Another one we just did, which was an interesting naming process as well too. It's a professional service firm based here in Chicago. They do executive coaching and leadership development, and helping organizations if they have to adjust their workforce or reduce their workforce to help those people get new jobs. We spent a lot of time with them really trying to understand, what is it that they created, for organizations, for their clients going forward. And, we had a couple names that were, really coming to the top. One of them was Bravura, which means to go bravely. And the second name option was Avanti, which is I think it's an Italian exclamation meaning go forward with enthusiasm and courage. And we realized that by putting these two names together, we not only merged the two meanings and linked them, but we also created a word that was going to be much easier to trademark in the United States. So that the new name was Bravanti, and it means to go courageously forward. And the minute that all came together, and we realized, first of all, there were no other names or organizations branded as Bravanti, so we weren't going to have any problem in terms of getting a trademark, any kind of competitive issues. The enthusiasm level just rolled forward for people to say that this is the name, this is something that will differentiate us. We're so excited. It really brings new energy, and it's so unlike anything else in their industry. And the minute we hit that point, it started rolling forward in a very enthusiastic kind of way.
Great. Yeah. I've been in IT before I got into naming and branding, and it's a similar feeling when you get the right name the first time for a new project. And it's highly underestimated, because I've had so many times, because I was in IT at the time, I wasn't in naming or even branding or marketing, and we were just like building software, building websites, and you don't even realize how much that changes and how much you miss not having a name. I wrote an article on that topic recently, but like when you have a whole team, even if it's a great idea and they love their idea, it's like you're talking about what about it? It's going to do that. It's, do you know what I mean? It's like until you give it a name, and that's what I keep saying to people, like you give it a name, then it's a project. Otherwise, you know,
Right.
ideas we have like 50 a day. I don't know.
Yep.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, that's the excitement that rebranding can bring an organization, and really, if it's needed, to rally the troops, get the excitement building, have people kind of fall in love with their company again, and their employer again, because they think it's so new and dynamic and fresh and competitive, and all of a sudden it just starts to produce new energy in ways that it hasn't in the past.
That's amazing. Great. You touched on, when you go through the naming process, that obviously trademarking is a concern. What about domain names and like social media handles? Do you? I'm going to ask you about domain names, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where does that come into the process, if at all?
So when we are going through the naming process and coming up with kind of final options, so once they're ones that have really, we kind of determined that these should stay on the table for consideration. Then we do a cursory trademark search and domain search, because we don't want to limit the creative process by continually saying, nope, you can't use that, you can't do that, you can't, we want to empower the creative process by saying, we will find the right word and name for the organization, so remove any of those kind of obstacles. When it comes to the trademarking and domain, though, in the United States, trademarking is a huge issue. It's really, that's the biggest hurdle that we have to get over. And it's an easy process, because you just go online and check the database for organizations and see if there's anything there. Then you have to consult a trademark attorney who will evaluate it to say, are you in any way in competitive industries or sell competitive products or services, so that you would create confusion in the mind of the customer. And that's what the trademark patent office looks at, is, does this create any confusion for the customer to be able to differentiate between these two organizations? Once you're kind of cleared that hurdle a little bit, then we start to look at domains. And oftentimes domains today are either already taken and being used, sometimes internationally. So it's not even a US based company. It's a global organization, or you have to spend a lot of money to buy that domain. And organizations are always a little hesitant about doing that, is that worth it and so forth. So it sometimes requires modifying your brand or your domain name to be able to use that new trademarked name, by either a different extension, be it .net or .us or so forth, or the addition of something to it that makes it relevant for the future. So, it could be adding a numeral or a hyphen or something like that, that just makes sure that it's an obtainable domain. But it's challenging as well, because that, in today's world, that is the first way any consumer in a direct-to-consumer effort is going to find you, is by that domain name. So it's a challenge. The big trend that we're seeing in the US, there are really two big trends in rebranding, actually. The first is those organizations which regretfully years ago chose a name which has some kind of racist feeling or tone to it or depiction to it. And they are now having to change those brand names, whether it's a football team or a baseball team or a pancake company. They're having to change their names because they are just so out of place today and so irrelevant. So that's one big trend we're seeing. The other one is the shortening and simplification of names. So, maybe even a small company that was, the Johnson Tractor Company, which sold tractors to farmers or something like that. And now they're selling other kind of equipment and so forth. And so tractors too limiting. So they drop descriptive words or names and just go by the name Johnson. We're seeing that a lot in, in different fields. And it, it's partly because we as consumers are really starting to use one name descriptors for companies, and any new tech company that starts up now is always one simple, easy name, and it makes a really nice logo and a tile for your smartphone and so forth. So we're seeing a lot of people shedding extra language that they have in their names and really going with the one word that is most powerful and has the most equity in it.
Which makes it even harder, I guess, doing your job.
It's a discovery process of, what is it what's most important in this name, and what else can we just trim off and let go of now, so that we can just have a better, stronger, differentiating brand.
Yeah, I think it was Exupéry, wasn't it? Who said perfection is not when there's nothing else to add, it's when there's nothing else to take out.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. All right. What's next? What's next for rebranding experts? What do you have? Well, there's not much left of the year, but still.
So one of the interesting things that we're spending time even bolstering up our capabilities on and so forth is the customer experience process as part of a rebranding, and working with those organizations that are choosing a new brand on that deeper dive into their customer experience journey, and what are all the different touch points that need to be changed along that process. Is there an e-commerce capability as well that needs to have a similar updating or be re-engineered entirely so that it delivers against this new brand promise? And that's, it's kind of the merger of all the rebranding activity that's in the marketplace and all this customer experience focus that organizations are going through, and making sure that this is the opportune time to bring that all together and align it in a new and exciting way. And so those things tend to take longer to execute against. And so oftentimes the change will start as we're getting ready to launch the new brand, but there's a lot of follow through work that still needs to happen in terms of making that making it come to fruition and actually be fully visible to the customer.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's becoming a trend now with my interviews, where I say that's last question and then I add another one, but I have another one.
Okay.
No, it just happens that way. No, because you mentioned consumers, so customers of the brand, so the end users. Is there, and that's a huge concern, I guess, when somebody's considering a rebrand, like you mentioned, how are they going to take it? Do you do that sort of thing? Is it a done thing? Is there a way to test that before you actually launch the rebranding process?
So testing the new name, the new brand, to see what experience or what the reaction is. So every organization is different in terms of how comfortable they are going to market with their new brand. Some, originally will start out saying, we want to go out and test it with a group of consumers and get their reaction to it. And also, learn or uncover if there's any unanticipated reaction to it that through all our work that we're doing, we didn't see. And so this is just kind of a pressure test or a safety net to make sure that, we learn those things. Interestingly enough, when you get to the point of having that new brand, and we've done all our basic research in terms of saying, here's a maybe a word in another non-English language that is close, that somebody may say, is this the same, and so forth. Companies end up being feel it's less important to go out and test it, and they'll do a smaller focus group, kind of bouncing it off of a few key clients maybe, or customers of theirs, and getting their reaction to it, or going to an industry expert that would say, on a confidential basis, having them look at it, that somebody that's got a broad view of all the different players within a particular industry and so forth. So while there's always a lot of enthusiasm to start, that we're going to go out and test this and make sure that it's, it's 100%, ready to go. When it comes time to actually do that, they tend to say, let's just test it with a few folks instead. So it's an interesting, we always have to say that can be expensive too, depending upon what kind of survey mechanism you have, what tool you use. You could spend a lot of money testing the brand, and all of a sudden we see their confidence level go so high in it that they say, no, we don't need to invest as much doing that. Let's ask a few folks, but not in a very formal kind of research effort.
Yeah, I've seen some, but that really depends, I guess, on the type of brand image and the type of customers they have. I've seen some brands that actually involve their audience in the rebrand. So like they get name suggestions or logo suggestions, and I actually admire it quite a bit because I can see like it's very cool in terms of creating a buzz and engagement, but I can see how it can go very wrong as well. So it's yeah.
Yeah, there's kind of two thoughts on that, because it was maybe a year or two ago, we saw this uptick in what we were calling crowdsourcing rebranding. And it tended to be smaller organizations that they used it as a positive customer interaction way to say, our relationship and your viewpoint is very important to us. So we want to share this with you and tell us what you think, and so forth. And we're getting feedback, and then they were going back and making their decision on what they were going to do going forward. A couple of things that happened in that process that we saw, and so we started advising clients, is that, first of all, the minute you tell people that you're potentially changing your name, you're changing your brand, you're gonna be going through this kind of dramatic transformation, the potential to confuse them goes up. And you'll have many customers that will say, well, no, wait a second, I thought you changed your name. No, we didn't change your name. We were just asking what you thought of this new name that we were considering. So there's a possibility of creating confusion out there. And that's the last thing you want in this whole process, is to be confusing your own customer as to what name you're going by and what they should call you and so forth. And then the second thing is, when you go to rebrand, we lean very heavily into the philosophy as try to flip the switch on one day as much as possible, that all your new brand assets will switch over to the new brand, and you make a big announcement. You do a big event internally to say, okay, we're going live now, and you then launch it externally and make your big announcement to the media and so forth, and you flip over your website and all your materials and so forth. It's impossible to do that 100% in one day, but anything that you can do that eliminates the question as to what name do you go by now, or should I look for the old domain or the new domain or whatever, the more successful you're going to be at gaining, getting that new customer attention and excitement behind it. So by engaging customers in a rebranding process, you kind of double down on this risk of confusion and not, unclarity, and you don't want that. You want it to be super clear to people. So I think that kind of crowdsourcing of rebranding works better in small organizations, where they're not, they may have a lot of personal touch or relationship with their customers and so forth, as opposed to a bigger one that, don't give your competition any reason to say those people don't know what they're doing. They can't even decide what name they want, and then they're taking advantage of the fact that you're doing a positive thing about trying to get customer input into your rebranding. So we tend to say, let's do all the work internally. We can test it confidentially if needed, but then let's go out with a big bang and try to, to transition all your brand assets as much as possible on one day. And you are that new company on that day.
Yeah. And you also kind of create and own your story then. I guess it's, it's one thing to engage customers, but it's kind of still your job to create that story and then make them feel part of it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was really my last question.
Good one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Terrific. Let me know any other questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you too. Have a good
All
day.
right, take care. Bye-bye.